The Nexus Prime Military Institute hung in the cosmic void like a monument to the galaxy's collective belief that warfare could be conducted with dignity, honor, and preferably scheduled tea breaks. For 3 centuries, this gleaming testament to organized violence had produced officers who understood that proper military engagement required rules, etiquette, and the sort of tactical precision that would make a chess grandmaster weep with joy. The Institute prided itself on transforming the galaxy's finest specimens into refined practitioners of what they diplomatically termed civilized conflict resolution, which was rather like calling a supernova an energetic stellar event, technically accurate but missing several crucial details about the nature of destructive force. The current academic year hosted representatives from across the known galaxy, each species contributing their unique approach to the art of structured mayhem. The Threnody brought their crystalline precision and unfortunate tendency to calculate the aesthetic beauty of battle formations before considering their tactical effectiveness. Their translucent forms refracted light in patterns that supposedly communicated complex strategic concepts, though mostly they just gave everyone headaches during long lectures. The Qualex contributed their tentacled efficiency and collective problem-solving abilities, approaching warfare with the methodical thoroughness of beings who had evolved from hive-minded organisms. They could coordinate attacks with mathematical precision, provided everyone agreed on the attack plan approximately 6 hours in advance and filed the proper paperwork. The hegemony species floated through corridors as pure energy constructs contained in polished metallic shells. Their warfare philosophy, emphasizing the elegant application of overwhelming technological superiority. They approached combat like a well-orchestrated symphony, beautiful and devastating, assuming the enemy was polite enough to stand still during the performance. And then there was the human. Kayla Chen occupied a seat in the back corner of advanced tactical theory with the unremarkable presence of someone who had mastered the art of observational camouflage. While her classmates engaged in elaborate philosophical discussions about the moral implications of flanking maneuvers, she absorbed information with the focused intensity of a gravitational singularity collecting matter. The other recruits had learned to treat her with the cautious respect typically reserved for unexploded ordnance. Not because she was threatening, quite the opposite, actually. She was unfailingly polite, helpful with study groups, and possessed the kind of quiet competence that made instructors nod approvingly during practical exercises. But humans had a reputation throughout civilized space for being unpredictable in ways that defied mathematical modeling. Commandant Thyrix 9 dominated the front of the lecture hall with the imposing presence of 8 feet of biomechanical precision. His species had long ago abandoned purely organic existence in favor of enhanced cybernetic integration, creating beings who thought like computers but retained enough biological intuition to understand the illogical nature of actual combat. His optical sensors swept across the assembled students with the methodical efficiency of targeting systems conducting threat assessment. Today we examine the Institute's simulation protocols, Thyrix 9 announced, his voice carrying the harmonic resonance of someone whose larynx had been replaced with a sound system that could double as a weapons targeting array. These scenarios test your ability to apply theoretical knowledge under pressure. The holographic display activated, showing the familiar progression that every military academy in the galaxy used for officer training. Level 1 simulations tested basic formation tactics against predictable enemies. Level 2 introduced environmental variables and multiple threat types. Level 3 added civilian populations and moral complexity. Level 4 simulations, Thyrix 9 continued, incorporate psychological warfare and unconventional tactics. Most graduates never advance beyond this level, as it represents the theoretical limits of civilized military doctrine. Murmurs of approval rippled through the assembled students. The Institute's Level 4 certification was recognized across 12 star systems as the mark of truly exceptional military leadership. Graduates typically commanded fleets within a decade and influenced strategic doctrine for generations. However, Thyrix 9 said, his vocal processors dropping to a lower frequency that seemed to vibrate through the deck plating. There exists a 5th level that few are aware of, and fewer still have attempted. The lecture hall fell silent, with the sort of quiet that precedes announcements of natural disasters or tax audits. Even the hegemony representatives stopped their constant energy fluctuations, creating an eerie stillness in the artificial atmosphere. The Terra Protocol Simulation. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Threnody crystals actually darkened, with what might have been fear or might have been existential dread. DO1. With their species, the emotional spectrum was difficult to interpret. Kavalek's tentacles writhed in agitation, while hegemony energy patterns flickered like candle flames in a hurricane. The Terra Protocol was developed following our first comprehensive analysis of human military doctrine. Thyrix 9 explained, activating a holographic display that showed a blue-green world rotating slowly in the darkness. After initial contact with Earth forces, the Institute's leadership decided that our officer training required expansion. The word expansion carried roughly the same emotional weight as amputation or cosmic horror. Human warfare, as documented through their extensive historical conflicts, operates according to principles that exist outside the boundaries of civilized military thought. No rules of engagement, no codes of honor, no limitations on tactics beyond the simple requirement that victory be achieved through any means necessary. Kayla Chen leaned forward slightly in her seat, showing the first sign of genuine interest she'd displayed all semester. Several nearby students noticed the movement and instinctively shifted away, as if proximity to curiosity about human warfare might be contagious. The simulation presents scenarios based on documented human conflicts throughout their species' military evolution. Thyrix 9 continued, his optical array focusing on the holographic Earth with something that might have been professional respect or might have been barely contained horror. Urban warfare in collapsed infrastructure, guerrilla tactics in hostile terrain, psychological operations designed to destroy enemy morale rather than enemy forces. Resource-based combat where victory depends not on superior equipment or tactics, but on the ability to adapt, improvise, and survive using whatever materials happen to be available. The silence that followed was so complete it seemed to have mass. Students exchanged glances that conveyed complex mixtures of fascination and terror, like tourists at a natural history museum contemplating exhibits of extinct predators. In 317 years of operation, Thyrix 9 announced with a solemnity usually reserved for funeral orations, exactly 0 recruits have successfully completed the Terra Protocol Simulation. The statistics appeared on the holographic display like evidence at a war crimes tribunal. Attempts, 847. Completions, 0. Average survival time, 4.3 minutes. Psychological casualties requiring extended therapy, 731. Recruits who requested immediate transfer to civilian careers, 116. The record holder, Thyrix 9 continued, managed to survive for 18 minutes and 47 seconds before suffering complete psychological breakdown. Most participants request emergency extraction within the first 5 minutes, often accompanied by requests for memory modification to remove the experience entirely. A Threnody student raised one crystalline appendage with the nervous precision of someone handling unstable explosives. Commandant, if the simulation is impossible to complete, why does the Institute maintain it? Thyrix 9's optical sensors focused on the questioner with the intensity of laser targeting systems. Because, Cadet Prism of Dawn, understanding our limitations is as important as understanding our capabilities. The Terra Protocol serves as a reminder that there are forms of warfare that exist beyond the reach of civilized military doctrine. He paused, allowing his sensors to sweep across the assembled students. It also functions as an excellent screening mechanism for identifying recruits with suicidal tendencies or severe psychological disorders. That observation drew nervous laughter from some of the more confident students. The Kvalex began calculating the statistical probability of attempting something with a 100% failure rate. The hegemony representatives discussed the logical paradox of maintaining an impossible test. The simulation remains active primarily as an educational tool, Thyrix 9 concluded. It demonstrates the fundamental difference between warfare, as practiced by civilized species, and the brand of organized chaos that humans apparently consider Tuesday afternoon military exercises. And that was when Kayla Chen raised her hand. The effect was immediate and profound. Conversations stopped mid-syllable. Several students actually gasped. One Cavalex recruit fell off their hover platform, with a sound like a bag of wet spaghetti hitting the deck. The hegemony representatives flickered so violently. Their containment fields issued proximity warnings. Thyrix 9 stared at the raised hand with the focused intensity of someone whose targeting computer had just identified an unknown threat. His optical array cycled through several different scanning modes, apparently trying to determine if he was experiencing some sort of sensor malfunction. Cadet Chen, he said carefully, his voice processors struggling to modulate tone for a situation that had never been programmed into his social interaction protocols. I would like to attempt the Terra Protocol Simulation, Commandant. The words hung in the artificial atmosphere like a challenge to the fundamental laws of physics. Thyrix 9's biomechanical systems actually paused for 1.7 seconds, an eternity in cybernetic terms, while his consciousness grappled with a concept that had apparently never been loaded into his pre-assay, decision-making matrices. Cadet Chen, he said slowly, each word processed through multiple linguistic filters. I'm not certain you fully comprehend the nature of what you're requesting. I understand completely, Commandant. You've described a military simulation based on human combat doctrine and historical warfare patterns. As a human, I believe I'm qualified to attempt it. The logic was so straightforward and so absolutely terrifying that it took several moments for its implications to propagate through the collective consciousness of everyone present. Here was the one species in known space whose military doctrine was considered too chaotic for civilized study, and one of their representatives wanted to take the test specifically designed to prove their impossibility. It was like watching entropy develop a sense of humor and decide to enroll in a physics course. The simulation has never been attempted by a human, Thyrix 9 observed, his sensors still focused on Kayla Chen as if she were a particularly complex mathematical equation that refused to resolve properly. Then it seems like a significant oversight in the experimental methodology, Commandant. The sheer audacity of the statement was breathtaking. Here was a species that had somehow convinced the galaxy's premier military institution to create a test specifically designed to demonstrate their tactical impossibility, and now one of them wanted to take it. The irony was so profound it approached philosophical paradox. Thyrix 9's processors ran through approximately 47,000 different response protocols before settling on military pragmatism. Very well, Cadet Chen. We will schedule your attempt for 0800 hours tomorrow. I strongly recommend you reconsider overnight. Thank you, Commandant. I won't be reconsidering. And that, Thyrix 9 realized with the growing certainty of someone watching a star go supernova in real time, was probably the most human response she could have given. Word of Kayla's intention spread through Nexus Prime faster than a containment breach in the reactor cores. By evening mess, the Institute buzzed with speculation, concern, and the kind of morbid fascination usually reserved for observing stellar catastrophes from a safe distance. Fellow recruits cornered her at every opportunity, offering advice that ranged from mathematically sound to completely hysterical. The Threnody presented crystalline matrices that calculated her chances of success as approaching theoretical impossibility. The Cavalex shared collective memories of Academy graduates who had attempted the Terra Protocol and never quite recovered their mental equilibrium. The hegemony representatives offered detailed energy pattern analyses, proving that her biological neural structure was fundamentally incompatible with the psychological stresses the simulation would generate. They suggested she consider a career in diplomatic services instead. Kayla listened politely to all of them, thanked them for their concern, and continued with her normal routine with the calm determination of someone who had already made peace with her decision. The Terra Protocol Simulation Chamber occupied the deepest level of Nexus Prime, partly for security reasons, and partly because the Institute's leadership preferred to keep the screaming as far from regular classes as possible. The facility resembled a medical trauma center more than a training environment, with observation galleries surrounding a central pod that looked disturbingly similar to an emergency surgical suite. Commandant Thyrix 9 arrived at precisely 0800 hours, accompanied by a full medical team, 3 psychiatric specialists, 2 emergency technicians, and what appeared to be half the Institute's faculty. Word had spread. Everyone wanted to witness what they assumed would be either a miracle of human adaptability or a complete psychological collapse documented for academic study. Final opportunity to reconsider, Thyrix 9 offered, his vocal processors modulated to express something that might have been concern. "I appreciate the consideration, Commandant, but I'm ready to proceed." The technicians conducted the standard pre-simulation briefing with the nervous efficiency of beings who had performed this routine hundreds of times, while secretly hoping they'd never have to do it again. Neural interface calibration, emergency extraction protocols, psychological monitoring systems, medical intervention procedures, all standard operating procedure for feeding someone into the Institute's most notorious technological meat grinder. The simulation will begin with basic parameters and escalate according to your performance metrics, the lead technician explained, his tentacles quivering with barely contained anxiety. Most participants request extraction during the initial engagement phase. There is no shame in acknowledging the limitations of species-specific psychological conditioning. If anyone noticed the irony of a Kvalex lecturing a human about psychological limitations, they were diplomatic enough not to mention it. The neural interface activated with the subtle hum of sophisticated technology, convincing someone's brain that it was experiencing a completely different reality. The observation gallery's displays came online, showing biometric readings, neural activity patterns, and tactical situation updates that would allow them to monitor every aspect of her psychological dissolution in real time. Kayla found herself standing in what had once been a city, but now resembled a three-dimensional definition of chaos. Smoke rose from collapsed buildings in every direction. The air carried the distinctive mixture of cordite, burning synthetics, and the ozone smell that lingered after energy weapons discharge. Somewhere in the distance, the rhythmic thunder of artillery mixed with the sharper crack of small arms fire. It was anarchy given physical form, a battlefield environment where the only consistent rule was that there were no rules. In the observation gallery, Thyrix 9 monitored the biometric readings with growing fascination. Heart rate steady at 72 beats per minute, stress hormone levels within normal parameters. Neural activity showing focused attention patterns rather than panic responses. Either she was experiencing a completely different simulation from every other recruit who had attempted this scenario, or humans really were as adaptably terrifying as their reputation suggested. The first engagement materialized from 3 directions simultaneously, because the Terra Protocol designers believed in establishing dominance quickly. Enemy combatants using suppression tactics, advancing through rubble-strewn streets in coordinated formations, executing a textbook pincer movement designed to eliminate her position through concentrated firepower. She didn't fight them, she vanished. The observation gallery erupted in confused murmurs as Kayla simply disappeared from the primary engagement zone. Sensors tracked her movement through the demolished infrastructure, but her tactics made no sense according to established military doctrine. Instead of seeking elevated positions for tactical advantage, she went underground, using maintenance tunnels and building foundations to move unseen. Instead of engaging the enemy forces directly, she began systematically dismantling their operational capability from the periphery. A severed communication cable here, eliminating their coordination, an improvised explosive device there, removing their heavy weapon support. A series of carefully orchestrated diversions that convinced them they were facing a much larger force than one person with improvised equipment. "She's not engaging them," observed Cadet Prism of Dawn, her crystalline form flickering with what might have been awe. "She's hunting them." The distinction was crucial. Every other recruit had approached the Terra Protocol as a military engagement to be won through superior tactics, advanced strategy, or overwhelming force. Kayla was treating it as a survival scenario where the primary objective wasn't victory in any traditional sense, but simply remaining functional while systematically destroying the enemy's ability to function. It was pragmatic. It was efficient. It was absolutely terrifying to observe. The simulation escalated, introducing increasingly complex scenarios. Urban warfare became guerrilla tactics, became psychological operations, became pure survival-based resource combat. Each level was carefully designed to break the systematic thinking that defined civilized military doctrine. But Kayla wasn't thinking systematically. She was adapting, improvising, using whatever was available and discarding whatever wasn't immediately useful. When the simulation denied her advanced weaponry, she manufactured her own from industrial materials and basic chemistry. When it isolated her from potential allies, she created diversions that convinced enemies they were facing a much larger, better-equipped force. When it tried to break her morale with seemingly impossible odds, she restructured the engagement parameters until the odds became irrelevant to the outcome. How is she accomplishing this? The Qualex technician's compound eyes tracked her movement through what should have been an impossible maze of hostile terrain and overwhelming enemy forces. Thyrix 9 observed the tactical displays with the growing realization that he was witnessing something unprecedented in 3 centuries of military education. She's not attempting to achieve victory according to our definitions. She's changing the definition of victory. The final scenario was the Institute's masterpiece of tactical impossibility. An urban environment completely controlled by hostile forces, no available resources, no possible extraction routes, and victory conditions that required accomplishing multiple contradictory objectives, while outnumbered approximately 2,000 to 1. It was designed to be unwinnable because the point had never been victory. The point was demonstrating that some forms of warfare existed beyond the boundaries of civilized understanding. Kayla completed it in 39 minutes. Not through superior tactics or brilliant strategic innovation, but through an approach so fundamentally human that the simulation's artificial intelligence had never been programmed to recognize it as a valid response pattern. She ignored the assigned victory conditions entirely and focused on a single objective, making the enemy's strategic position untenable. Instead of trying to accomplish the predetermined objectives, she created a cascading series of problems that made it impossible for the enemy to maintain their operational advantages. A few carefully placed infrastructure failures forced evacuation of key positions. Some creative sabotage eliminated their supply lines and communication networks. A sequence of psychological warfare techniques convinced them they were facing an adversary much larger and better equipped than one human with improvised materials. By the time the simulation concluded, she hadn't technically achieved victory, according to the original parameters. But the enemy forces had tactically withdrawn from the entire engagement zone, leaving her in complete control of the battlefield and free to accomplish whatever objectives she deemed appropriate. The neural interface disengaged, returning her to the simulation chamber and a silence so absolute it seemed to have gravitational effects. Every being in the observation gallery stared at her as if she had just violated several fundamental laws of physics through pure force of personality. "How do you feel, Cadet Chen?" The medical officer's scanning equipment trembled in his appendages. "Fine, Commandant. Thirsty, perhaps." The scenario duration was longer than I anticipated. Thyrix 9 found his voice first, probably because his cybernetic enhancements included emergency protocols for processing impossible situations. "Cadet Chen, you are aware that you have just accomplished something that has never been achieved in 3 centuries of simulation operation." She shrugged with a gesture that somehow managed to contain entire volumes of human military philosophy compressed into a single movement. The scenarios were challenging, but they followed predictable escalation patterns once you understood the underlying assumptions. Predictable patterns. Yes, Commandant. The simulation was designed by beings who approach warfare as a structured activity with defined parameters and measurable outcomes. But human military doctrine isn't structured in that sense. It's adaptive. The simulation kept escalating, according to logical progressions, But logic isn't the primary factor in human combat methodology. The silence that followed was the sound of several dozen highly educated military minds attempting to process a concept that had just fundamentally restructured their understanding of warfare itself. What is the primary factor in human combat methodology? Thyrix 9 asked, though his processing systems were already calculating that he might not want to analyze the answer too carefully. Stubbornness, Commandant. Humans don't usually win military engagements because we're more intelligent or better equipped or superior tacticians. We win because we refuse to accept that victory is impossible. And there it was, the fundamental difference that had made the Terra Protocol Simulation unpassable for every other species in the galaxy. They had approached it as a test to be passed through superior capability or advanced training. Kayla had approached it as a problem to be solved through sheer refusal to acknowledge defeat as a valid outcome. The implications were staggering enough to require restructuring the Institute's entire approach to military education. For 3 centuries, Nexus Prime had maintained the Terra Protocol as proof that some forms of warfare existed beyond civilized understanding. They had created it as a demonstration of human tactical impossibility, but they had made one critical error in their foundational assumptions. They had designed an unwinnable scenario according to non-human standards, which meant they had accidentally created the perfect examination of human military doctrine. The irony was so profound it approached philosophical revelation. The galaxy's most sophisticated military institution had spent 3 centuries failing a test designed to prove that humans were impossible to understand, and the reason for their failure was exactly what made humans impossible to understand in the first place. Thyrix 9 regarded his human cadet, standing calmly in the center of what had just become the Institute's most dramatic educational paradigm shift since its founding, and realized that military science was about to become significantly more complicated. Cadet Chen, he said finally, I believe we need to schedule extensive consultations regarding curriculum modification. She nodded politely. Of course, Commandant. Should I prepare a comprehensive analysis of tactical recommendations? Tactical recommendations. From the species that had just demonstrated that everything the galaxy thought it understood about advanced warfare might be based on fundamentally incorrect assumptions. Thyrix 9 felt his optical sensors dim with something that might have been anticipation or might have been existential terror. Yes, he said. Yes, I think that would be highly educational. And somewhere deep in Nexus Prime's data processing systems, the Terra Protocol Simulation quietly updated its operational records to reflect the first successful completion in its 3-century history, filed under a category that the programmers had never expected to use. Paradigm shift. Recommend complete system architecture review. The galaxy's understanding of military science had just become infinitely more complicated, and the human responsible for that complication was already considering lunch plans, which, when analyzed objectively, was probably the most human response possible to single-handedly revolutionizing the military doctrine of 15 different star systems. Some things, apparently, never change. Humans would always be impossible to predict using conventional logic, and they would always approach that impossibility with the kind of casual pragmatism that made the rest of the galaxy simultaneously grateful and terrified that they were generally fighting on the same side. The Institute would adapt, naturally. Military institutions always do. But it would require considerably more time than 39 minutes, and it would involve exponentially more administrative documentation. After all, revolutionizing the fundamental assumptions of galactic military doctrine required proper procedural compliance. Even paradigm shifts had to follow established bureaucratic protocols. It was all very civilized,